Hey everybody, this is Allison from Allykatkreations. How are you? My throat is starting to get sore. I took a bunch of vitamins and I had some tea, but I'm going to see how much I can get through. Because I have a really fun chapter to read. In the monster load, Oahspe. Told you I was going to read Oahspe. So I am choosing to read the book of Cosmogony and Prophecy. As much as there's a lot of really good chapters here, because my throat and my teeth are acting up, like they fell a few times today, and I put some Bixidin up there, but they're loose still. So I know that most people don't really care about the pronunciations of things, because if they read them, I'm sure they would also be very lost. But I don't want to hurt my throat, and I don't even want to have to sit there and try. So I'll get back to those chat. There's, I mean, this, like Durantia, this is humongous book. It's almost 1,000 pages. $875, but then it's huge. So I hope you guys are liking my content. Like, not like the thumbs up kind of thing, but like liking what I'm bringing to the table. Please give me comments. I think what I'm reading is Spirit wants me to tackle certain things at a specific time, for a reason. So it's not because I don't want to go in order, it's because of what I'm getting called to read, which means that it's meant for somebody out there to be activated or to, you know, pick up the vibe. So I'm going to read as much as I can without straining or crackling, and I've noticed my voice does crackle. This is a big chapter, so I don't know if I'm going to read the whole thing in one shot, but I'll do what I can. But it's really interesting and really fun. So if my work resonates with you, please hit that like button. I get a lot of people that watch my stuff and no one likes it. Don't make me cry. Please share on other platforms that you won't be censored on, and spread the word. Word's the bird. Subscribe. I put up a pick a deck oracle reading today. It's very interesting, depending what you pick. So I hope everybody's doing really good. I'm hanging in, watching my neighbor's dog. So a lot of my schedule's off. And then this started to bother me earlier this afternoon. I had turmeric, ginger, lemon tea with honey. I had something else. But I ran out of a lot of stuff. Hopefully I'm able to find it in the store. There's a lot of stuff you can't find anymore. And a lot of places online are ripping people off. But I did take my vitamins, so hopefully this isn't anything bad. Okay, so we're going to start on chapter 1. The same principles apply to all the stars, suns, planets, and moons, differing in manifestation on account of size, motion, density, and relative place. See, density. The earth floateth in the midst of a vortex, the outer extremity of which is somewhat beyond the moon. The vortex is globular, corresponding to the form of the earth, with slight differences, which will be pointed out hereafter. Vortices are not all closed at the ends, some are open at both ends. The vortex turneth the earth on its axis with its own axial motion. Consequently, the outer part of the vortex hath greater velocity than near the earth's surface, which hath an axial motion of 1,000 miles an hour. It'd be hard for water to be on a spinning globe. The moon hath a vortex surrounding it also, which hath a rotation axially once a month. But being an open vortex turneth not the moon. All vortices do not lay in contact with the planet, in which case it is called a dead planet. The semi-diameter of the moon's vortex is 10 times the moon's diameter, and the semi-diameter of the Earth's vortex 30 times the Earth's diameter, with variations which will be explained hereafter. The outer rim, 42,000 miles broad, of the moon's vortex hath a revolution axially with the Earth once a month. The swiftest part of the Earth's vortex is therefore about 15,000 miles this side of the orbit of the moon. From the swiftest part of the moon's vortex, its force is towards the Earth's center. And if there were no Earth here at present, the vortex would make one presently. Things fall not to the Earth because of the magnetism therein, save as hereinafter mentioned, but they are driven toward the center of the vortex by the power of the vortex. Interesting. The diameter of the vortex is east and west, the lesser diameter north and south, with an inclination and oscillation relativity like the Earth. The name of the force of the vortex is called vortexia. That is positive force because it is arbitrary and exerteth east and west. As in the case of a wheel turning on its axis, its force will be at right angles with its axis, the extreme center of which will be no force. For which reason the north and south line of the Earth's vortex is called the vortexia, or negative force, for it is the subject of another. As a whirlwind gathereth up straw and dust, which travel toward the center of the whirlwind, and to the poles thereof, even so do corporeal substances incline to approach the poles of the Earth's vortex, which may be provided by posing a magnetized needle. In the early times, the Earth was longer north and south than east and west, but the Myvoixa vortexia. Being less than vortexia, the Earth assumed the globular form, which was afterward attenuated east and west. Then it again turned to adapt itself to the polarity north and south. In the various turnings of the Earth, the same force of the vortex exerted ever to the east and west, by which behavior every portion of the Earth hath been to the east, to the west, to the north, and to the south, which is proven in rocks and boulders, mountains, and earth. Wherefore it is shown there is no north or south polar power in the Earth as such. Furthermore, the iron mountains show they attract east and west and north and south without any regard to a central polar force in the Earth. Wherein mortals have been taught erroneously in regard to two powers which do not exist, as they have been heretofore set forth. These are the attraction of gravitation in the Earth and a North Pole magnetism in the Earth. The positive force of the vortex is, therefore, from the external toward the internal, and the negative force of the vortex is toward the poles, and is the ascendant toward the pole external from the sun's center. Hope you're keeping up. Whereof it may be said the force of the vortex is toward its own center, but turneth at the center and escapeth outward at the North Pole. As one may draw a line from the east to the center of the Earth, thence in a right angle due north, which would be the current of the vortex until the center were filled with a corporeal body, after which the same power appliedeth and is all one power, although for convenience called positive and negative. The vortexia can be concentrated in iron and steel and in iron ore, in which condition they are called magnetic. And these substances, opposed as needles, will assume the line of polarity of the vortex or its poles. The vortexia in the atmosphere will combine oxygen and hydrogen, and an explosion ensueth, which is called thunder. But if an iron wire be raised up in the air, a lightning rod, it formeth a negative center, to which the vortexia filleth quickly, following it down into the moisture of the earth, where it is dissolved. If the iron wire extended from a city to city and vortexia be charged at one end, it will manifest at the other pole, and at times even escape in a flame of fire. Electric flash. In the manner, the vortex of the earth constantly chargeth the earth with its vortexia in the east and west, and its manifesteth in the North Pole of the vortex in flames of fire, which are called borealis. But it sometimes happeth over high iron mountains that the light is manifested in other directions. A Suis can see vortexia, as is proven by placing a horseshoe magnet before him in the dark, and he will describe the polar light escaping, even though he hath not been previously informed. Then vortexia is manifested in flames of fire. It is called electricity. But when it layeth dormant, as in iron, it is called magnetism. Where two corporeal substances are rubbed quickly together, friction and heat result. This is the manifestation of vortexia. In the beginning of the Earth's vortex, the current concentrated certain substances, which will be described hereafter, in the center thereof, where by friction the vortexia manifested in heat, so that when the congregation of minerals of the earth's substance were together, they were as molten mass of fire. and for a long period of time after the fire disappeared, two great lights manifested, one at the North Pole and one at the South. Where the Earth, a center planet like the sun, the light would have been all around, in which case it would have been called photosphere. By Vortexia was the Earth first formed as a ball of fire. By the same power in the warmth of the surface of the Earth, manufactured to this day, think not that the heat cometh from the sun to the Earth. Heat cometh not from the sun to the Earth. See, 93 million billion miles away, of which matter mortals in part still dwell in the superstitions of the ancients, who believed all things came from the sun. For it is not said this day, heat and light come from the sun. Nay, without examination, they also talk about the attraction of gravitation of the sun extending to other planets. Corpora, as such, have no power in any direction whatever, neither attraction of cohesion, nor attraction of gravitation, nor hath it propulsion. But it is of itself inert in all particulars. As two ships sailing near each other will collide, as two balls suspended by long cords will approach each other somewhat, the cause lieth not in the ships or the balls, but in what external to them. Cast water on a dusty floor, and the drops of water will assume globular forms, being coated with dust. For convenience sake, it is said that the globular form is natural to a liquid, and it is called the globular power. But it is nevertheless caused by power external to itself. Approach one of the drops of water, which lieth coated with dust, with the piece of cloth, and instantly the globe of water breaketh and climbeth unto the cloth. This is erroneously called capillary attraction. But in fact, the water had no attraction for the cloth, nor the cloth for the water. The power which accomplished this was external to both, and was the same in kind as the vortexia that brought the earth to its center and maintained it therein. Withdraw the vortexian power, and the earth would instantly go into dissolution. When the cloth applieth the drop of water, it breaketh the vortex thereof, and the water goeth into divisible parts in the cloth in search of negative polarity. What is called corporeal substance, corporeal, which has length, breadth, and thickness, remaineth so by no power of its own, but by vortexia external thereto. Exchange the vortexia, and the corpor goeth into dissolution. This power was by the ancients called ooze, or the fourth dimension of corpor. Wherefore it is said the tendency of corpor is to uncorpor itself, dissolve and evaporate from the surface of the ocean and from the earth also. Moisture riseth upward. Turn a wheel slowly, and with water on its periphery, and the water flieth not off. Let the wheel stand idle, and the water runneth off. Or turn the wheel very swiftly, and the water flieth off. The same result would follow as regardeth water. If the wheel stood still with the current of air whirling around the wheel, if the air passed slowly, the water would fall. If a certain speed, the water would be retained on the periphery, but if at a higher speed, the water would be carried off. When the Earth's axial motion and vortexian power are equivalent, there is no evaporation of moisture outward. When the vortexia exceedeth, there is a great evaporation, but when the vortexia is less, there is rain. According to the Vortexian currents, so are the winds. And when these are discordant, small vortices ensue in the cloud regions. And each of these small vortices formeth a drop of rain, which is an infinitesimal. I'm going to get it. Infinitesimal planet. It's very frustrating when you know the word in your head and it don't come out of your mouth. Super frustrating. Super frustrating. Just saying. I'm going to get it. It's going to come. Nevertheless, all of them are under the propelling influence of the Earth's vortex and are thus precipitated to the Earth. But neither the Earth attracted the raindrops, nor do the raindrops attract themselves to the Earth. The Earth's vortex is a sub-vortex, existing within the Sun's vortex. Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, and so on, are corporeal worlds, and each and all of them within sub-vortices. And the combination of all these vortices within the Sun's vortex are known by the names Great Serpent or Solar Phalanx, for which reason the Sun's vortex was called the Master or Tao Sang by the ancient prophets. Were the sun planet extinct, the Master vortex would instantly make another sun, as the lines of the vortexia are in currents from the outer toward the interior. So do the solutions of corpore take the shape of needles in the master pointing toward the center, which condition of things is called light. And when these needles approach the center or even the photosphere, the actinic force without is called heat. Neither light nor heat nor attraction of gravitation cometh from the sun to the earth. Heat decreaseth in force in proportion to the square of the distance from the place of generation. Nevertheless, an allowance of decrease must be added thereunto of 1 to the 100. Light decreaseth in proportion to the divisibility of rays, as will be mentioned hereafter. Though a man see the light of the sun, as he seeth a horse in a field, yet there is no such thing as travel of light in fact, nor is there any substance of light. But that which is called light is polarity of corporeal needles in solution, caused by the lines of vortexia. In experiments on Earth, the flash requireth a certain time to polarize these infinitesimal needles. I'm getting there, guys. And for convenience sake, such lapse of time is called the travel of light. When the flash continueth, as in case of the sun center, the master's infinitesimal needles remain poised from the sun center outward, even to the earth, and may be compared to telegraph wires, with a battery of each end. But there is no travel in any sense whatsoever. Daylight is not therefore made by the sun, nor by the photosphere of the sun. Daylight is the condition of things polarized within the master vortex. Night is manufactured by the earth coming betwixt the master's focus and the outer extreme, so that both day and night continue all the time, and we realize them both alternatively in consequence of the axial motion of the earth. As in the case of night or of any darkness, when the needles of the atmospheric substance are distributed in polarity, or when the lines of needles are cut, as in eclipse, there is no direct manifestation of the Earth's vortexian currents, and such is the cause of darkness. For which reason, nitrogenous plants grow rapidly at night, whilst the ripening of certain fruits and grain require the light of day. For by the vortexia are seeds and grains and fruits and herbs charged with it. Thereof when man eateth, or as in breathing air, these things go into dissolution, as hereafter mentioned. The heat is eliminated and dodgeth itself in man. Or if certain herbs be piled together, and they commence dissolution, the heat is involved, and is called spontaneous combustion. Nevertheless, the herbs as such have no power to produce heat, but their rapid dissolution, the vortexia in them, endeavoreth to escape to some pole. The heat in herbs and seeds and plants and other growing things is because they are the object points of the antic force of vortexia. And this heat is herbs in equivalent to the same thing in iron, which is called magnesium. And his liberation or polar manifestation is, after all, one and the same thing as that which is discharged in a magnetic flame called electricity. So that the cause of all these things springeth from the vortex, the power and force of which is vortexia. By a sudden dissolution of vegetable substance, as wood or straw, we would have what is called fire or burning. There is no substance of heat nor of fire. A dissolution occurreth in which the vortexia is liberated. Corporeal substances all contain heat. Vortexia proper. Even snow and ice have its infestible qualities, and oils and herbs of all kinds, but the diamond containeth the highest percentage of charge. Interesting. Wherein they have taught erroneously that heat cometh from the sun, as may be proved in all the earth, that heat, so called, is evolved at the expense of destroying something, which is in general called combustion. And there is not in all the universe anything that can give off forever without receiving a supply forever. Heat had to be stored up in the first place in anything in heaven or earth before it could be liberated. Though a man burn a stick of wood, he can produce no more heat therefrom than what was stored within. Allow the sun to be 4.5 million miles in diameter and to be of the best quality of a diamond. Give it even 50% of the burning capacity and it would be entirely consumed in 8,000 years. And yet the sun is not of any such quality as a diamond, even not more so in quality than is the earth. But suppose it were even as a diamond, or as the highest conceived of center of heat, then that heat had to be previously given to it. Whence came it? To suppose that the heat exists of itself is folly. To suppose that heat can be produced forever without supply is not supported by any fact in heaven or earth. Friction produceth heat, but it is because the abrasion liberateth stored up in vortexia, or as in the case of glass on leather, vortexia is manufactured electricity. In the case of the sun, no such manufactory, nor one approximating its existence. Gotta love it's at the end of words. Wherein they have observed sunspots and said that during their presence, the temperature of the earth decreases, thereby reasoning that sunspots prevented the heat of the sun falling to the earth. They had erred in two particulars. First, in defective observations and guessing at a conclusion, and second, not having first determined the relative heat involved from the earth at different periods in its course of travel, of which matter further remarks will be made in hereafter. The same errors in regard to the light of the moon were made in the conclusions of Kepler and Humboldt in attributing the eclipse thereof to be governed by the sun's rays, being inflected by their passage through the atmosphere and thrown into the shadow cone. The superstitions of the ancients still cling to philosophers. They seek first to find the cause of things in the sun, or if failing therein, turn to the moon, or if failing there, they turn to the stars. Finding a coincidence in the tides or certain phases of the moon, they have erroneously attributed the cause of tides to the power of attraction in the moon, manifesting on the ocean, which is taught to this day as sound philosophy. Attraction, as previously stated, existeth not in the corporeal substance as a separate thing. There is no substance of attraction, nor is there any substance of gravitation. These powers are the manifestation of vortexia. If vortexia be charged into a piece of iron or steel, it is called a magnet, because it apparently draweth its own kind to itself. When two pieces of steel alike in quality are charged with vortexia to their utmost, their power will be in proportion to their dimensions. If one be twice the size of another, the magnetic force, so-called, will be to the mean 2 times more powerful. The form of a true magnet of steel to manifest the greatest positive and the greatest negative force should be nearly a right angled triangle, after the manner of a line of vortexia from the equatorial surface of the earth to its center, and thence toward the North Pole. By having 2 such magnets and bringing their poles together, a square is produced, which now balanceth its reciprocency and its emission of vortexia. I can't with these words. As in the case of Iron Mountain, it is forever receiving feebly equatorial and forever emitting feebly polarity, the vortexian current. Though for practical observation, the force may be said to be in a dormant state. And in this sense, should the Earth and other planets be considered. They are not in the shape of triangles or horseshoes, but as globes. Hence their positive and negative vortexian power, magnetism erroneously called, is less than the half-shoe form. Sorry, guys. Just an FYI. Toroidal is what I figured the Earth is. And yes, it there's an axis there. Okay. But it firmament and a little underneath. And each density, keyword, the shape changes. So I'm curious at what density this is being described as, which I would say possibly second to third. And I know this isn't easy language and I'm mispronouncing shit here and there, but bear with me. It gets better, I think. The power of a magnet decreaseth in proportion to the square of the distance from it. Under certain conditions, one leg of the magnet repelleth things from it, as previously stated. This is nevertheless one current, which vortexia flowed through the magnet, even as water floweth through a tube. This propelling power of the magnet also decreaseth in proportion to the square of the distance from it. If the poles of a single magnet be exposed, It will in time decrease from its maximum power until ultimately becometh of the same capacity as to external things, even as if the poles were closed by juxtaposition with another magnet. Wherein it will be observed that where the sun or moon or earth, the most powerful steel magnet, it would not take a long time as to the time of worlds when its magnetic attraction would not exceed native iron ore, wherein it will also be observed that that were the moon a globe of magnetic iron ore, it can be shown approximately how far would extend its power of magnetic attraction external to itself. Nevertheless, its magnet attraction in the extreme case would not be on water or clay, but on iron and of its kindred ores. So that if the moon exerted a magnetic force on the earth, it would manifest more on the magnetic needle or other iron substance that on the water of the ocean. By suspending a ball of magnetic iron alongside a suspended cup of water, it will be discovered that there is no magnetic attraction between them more than between two cups of water or between two vessels of clay. The highest magnetic power that can be imparted to steel in the form of a ball to its equatorial dimension to manifest in moving or equivalent flow is 7 of its diameters. But in the case of iron ore normal magnet, it is very considerably less than this. By this, it is shown that were the moon a steel magnet, it would not expert perceivable power more than 9,000 miles. Her shortest distance from the earth is 220,000 miles. Wherein it is shown that under the most extravagant supposition of power, her magnetic attraction is more than 200,000 miles short of reaching to the earth. Were there such a thing as magnetic attraction between iron and water, or between water and water, a still further discrepancy would result. Emitting the general parts of the moon as to iron and stone and clay and water, parts of a moon as to iron and stone and clay and water, to be alike and like unto the corporeal earth. The power of the magnetic attraction of the earth, as against the moon's, to hold the tides from rising, but would be in the ratio of the different sizes of the two bodies and their respective distances from the water contended for. In which case there would be more than 4,000 million times advantage of power in the earth. For if we give the same magnetic equivalent to each, we must give to each a decrease in proportion to the square of the distance of their centers from the point of contention, the ocean's tides. The same philosophy holdeth in regard to the sun and to Jupiter, and Saturn and Mars, and all other planets, making allowance for their different densities and velocities. As to the attraction so called between two earth substances, as granite or sandstone or lead or gold, or clay or water, it is far less than between two steel magnets, wherein it will be observed that there is utterly impossible for any attractive force to exert from one planet to another, or even from a planet to its own satellite. And though the most extravagant supposition based on measurement be given to the sun's supposed attenuative force, it doth not extend to the earth by more than 70 million miles, wherein they have taught error in place of truth. Mathematicians, people who do astronomy, I mean, I can look a lot of this up, but what's the fun? I gotta include all you guys. Chapter 2. Again, this was written and channeled in the 1800s. So a lot of things have advanced since then. But again, a lot of things have been inverted and falsified to us. So, I mean, most of this sounds and makes sense. Because around this time, there was Tartaria. They had free energy. They had motorized electrical devices back then. There is a lot of photos and a lot of things that came from that time frame. It wasn't just horse and buggy. There was a lot of things going on around that time, and then it was wiped out. Go look that up. There's a lot of people who do Tartaria. I might touch upon it from an art standpoint because of my extensive knowledge of that. But a lot of people cover that. But if you're interested in it, I'll definitely cover it. So comment. Chapter 2. There are two known things in the universe, eth and kapor. The former is the solvent of the latter. For comparison, take a lump of table salt, which through white is impervious to the sight of man. Cast it into water and it is lost to sight, though it is still existeth, and the sight of man can see through it. Earth's substance, as such, is equally soluble in ether. And the great Etherian firmament is thus constituted, being a dense solution of kapor. In the main, Etheria is transparent, but in some places translucent and in others opaque. That is a good tidbit. Here are iron and copper and granite and water and lead and clay and nitrogen and oxygen and hydrogen and various other kinds of corporeal substances as known on the earth. And besides these, millions of things not known on the earth. And eth holdeth them in solution, even after the manner that the air holdeth the substance of clouds, which is water in solution. And as some clouds are so ratified as to be imperceivable, whilst others are opaque and even black, so are the comparative conditions of Etheria, of which matters more will be said further on. In the case of a vortex in Etheria, that is after the manner of a whirlwind on the earth, the corporeal solutions are propelled toward the center thereof in greater density. When it is sufficiently dense to manifest light and shadow, it is called a comet or nebula. When still more dense, it is a planet. When a comet or nebula, the vortex, have not attained to an orbit of its own, it is carried into the currents of the master vortex, which currents are elliptical, parabolic, and hyperbolic, hence so-called eccentric travel of comets. At this age of the comet, it showeth nearly the configuration of its own vortex, its tail being the vortexia. If it appear to the east of the sun, its tail turneth eastward. If west of the sun, it turneth westward. Two directions of power are thus manifested, and also two powers. First, that the vortex of the sun hath power from the east to the west, and from the west to the east, to which the comet is subjected. Second, that the comet hath a vortex of its own, which is sufficient under the circumferences to maintain the general form of the comet. The ordinary comet hath its tail away from the sun, but some comets have two tails, one towards the sun and one away. Interior nebula is generally described as comets, while its exterior nebula, usually called nebula. Nevertheless, all such solutions of Kapor are of the like nature, being as the beginning or as the incomplete condensation of a planet. They do not all, nor half of them, ripen into planets, but their vortices are often broken and they return again into sublimated solutions and are lost to mortal sight. But nowhere in Etheria is there a solution of Kapor sufficient to put itself in motion, nor sufficient to condense itself, nor to provide the road of its travel. But its road of travel showeth the direction of the lines of the sun's vortex. Save and expect in such case, when a comet's vortex cometh within the vortex of another planet's vortex of greater power than its own. As a cyclone or whirlwind on the earth traveleth with great current of the wind, so travel the substances in Etheria within the axial lines of vortices in chief. Whether within the sun's vortex or eternal thereto, the rules apply, so far as nebula or comets are concerned and the vortexes that carry them. Axial velocity belongeth to all of them, and the tendency of all of them is to orbits, the which they attain to or not according to their strength compared to their master. When a nebulous planet is sufficiently dense to have its Kapor polarized, but so that its polarity corresponded to the polarity of the master, it is transparent and possesseth no eclipse power. But when nebula is polarized transversely, it is as a cloud in Etheria, with power to eclipse stars, and even to eclipse the sun itself, provide it be within the solar vortex. Of external nebulae, a sufficient size to be self-sustaining and to ultimately become planets, there are at present visible from the earth more than 8,000. These are in process of globe making, even as the earth was made, of nebulae within the sun's vortex, where they are usually called comets. There are upward of 8 or 10 new ones every year. Some of them survive but a few months, some a few years, some 100 years, and even 1,000 or more years. But in all cases, when the vortex of one of them bursteth, the Kapor of the comet flieth instantly into dissolution, more sublimated, and is lost to mortal sight. Where nebula is transparent and lieth between the earth and master center, it is not discernible either with the naked eye or with a telescope. Amongst the most sublimated forms of Kapor, in solution are nitrogen, oxygen, and hydrogen. When a subvortex or even a stratum of 10 or 20 million miles of this solution lieth between the earth and the sun center, and an observation of the sun can be taken, the observer is apt to erroneously suppose he hath discovered nitrogen, oxygen, and hydrogen in the sun's atmosphere or photosphere. And if the solution contain iron and gold and platina, I'm sure that's platinum, and other metals, the observer is apt to erroneously suppose that he hath discovered these things within the photosphere of or atmosphere of the sun. Wherefore, all observations made to determine such matters require that the observer shall first understand what lieth between the earth and the sun at the time of observation. But some of these sub-vortices in Ethera require 40 years' time in which to drag their whole length away from the line of observation, so that in no case is the observation of any value, even though it had been taken the breadth of the earth, unless it covereth a period greater than 40 years. But it is also so happeneth that perhaps when such an immense vortex is about passing away from the line, that any one equally large, or perhaps of different density of solution, cometh within the line. And it may thus occur that hundreds of years will elapse before a good view of the sun can be obtained, since some of these traveling plateauics are opaque, dark, so that the sun is kept in a dim eclipse for a year or two, and sometimes for hundreds of years. Wherefore philosophers have erroneously attributed their observations as having proved certain gases and certain metals within the sun's atmosphere. The same remarks apply to observations made of the stars and even the moon. In the case of light being manifested in a complete scaled magnet, the major retention is at the angle of two legs, and the minor light at the terminus of the north leg, North Pole. But in an eccentric magnet horseshoe, the two lights are manifested at the terminus of the two legs. A complete planetary vortex is a globe, or nearly so, and its manifested light like a complete magnet, but an immature vortex, as in the case of a comet or other small vortex, will manifest light at both poles, and sometimes in the middle, if it hath obtained to power to manufacture light of its own. In some cases, the comet or the nebula is not sufficiently condensed to produce light of its own, but containeth corporeal in a gaseous state, which of itself may have infinitesimal polarities, refracting the normal light of the master vortex. By observing the new moon, it will be seen that the light portion thereof describeth a larger circle than the dark portion. The bulge of the light side of the moon always pointeth towards the sun. It is an error to say that light cometh from the sun and striketh at the moon, and it's then reflected on the earth. As previously shown, there is no such thing or substance as light, but that which is called light is a manifestation of vortexian power. Also that the sea vortex is comparatively all one light, with the central focus. The reason one side of the moon is dark and one light is because it hath a positive and negative manifestation of the sea vortexia, for the moon also manufactureth its own light. A lot of people are finding that little tidbit out. As the moon advanceth to the next quarter, the same discrepancy in the two apparent sizes is manifest, and thus continueth until it is a full moon. It is an error to say the dark bodies appear smaller and light bodies larger because of absorption or refraction. The cause is not absorption or reflection, but of manufacture. Light bodies, so called, manufacture light of their own, ever so infinitesimal, which is all which is an envelope external to themselves. The eye of the observer seeth as well as a corporal body, and consequently it appeareth larger than it really is. The same rule applieth in regard to the sun, his photosphere, and to comets, and to all bodies that manifest light. Suitable deduction must be made in endeavoring to determine the size of a planet. Shadow is usually divided into two expressions: umbria, as the shadow of a man standing in sunlight, and darkness, as the shadow of the earth is in a cloudy night. Nevertheless, they are but one of the same thing, but in different degrees, both of which are here included in the word shadow. In a clear night, when the full moon shineth, two conditions are manifested on the earth. First, that a shadow is vertical to the moon, and the light side is not as light as when the sun shineth at noon. The density of the shadow from sunlight and the density of shadow from moonlight correspond exactly to comparative difference between the sunlight and moonlight. Pretty interesting. When it is full moon at midday, the light of the sun, so-called, is no greater because of the moon's presence. Observe the difference, however, on a given object if the ray from a mirror facing the sun be added to the ordinary sunlight. Hence, it is an error to attribute the moon's rays as being reflected from the sun to the earth. If it be premised that the light face of the moon is not a mirror, but is opaque, observe the following result from the moon when it is half full. The half of the moon is equivalent to half a globe. If the light of the sun fell on the bulge, the rays thus landed on the moon would cause that part of the moon to be trifle more than 4 times lighter or brighter than on the slopes. In an observation of this kind, and if the light were borrowed from the sun, 2 kinds of rays would result. The bulge of the moon would afford to center for rays to emanate in every direction, and the slope rays would refract at the same angle as received from the sun. The fact is, however, there is no intense center light manifestation on the moon's surface, in the place where it directly faceth the sun. Hence, there is no possibility of the light of the moon being produced by light from the sun or from the sun center. The light of the moon faceth the sun center, but the latter is not the cause thereof. The cause is in the emissions of positive and negative currents from the moon's vortex, and they manifest in the morvexia of the master. The same rule applies to all planets whose vortexes are negative. Chapter 3. I might go up to 4 and then cut it there so I don't kill my voice. Here followeth the method of manufacturing light and heat as they are on earth and moon and sun and other planets. The half of the earth's vortex, for example, which faceth toward the sun, is a concave lens to the earth. A similar lens, but far larger, is at the sun center. The convex faces of the 2 lenses are toward each other forever. They are ethereally connected by solutions of Kapoor needles, linear in position. The vortex is larger than the earth, so that the polar lights are possible on the shadow side, and the brilliancy of the polar lights are proportionately less than daylight at noon in the tropics, exactly in correspondence to the concentration of the rays by a lens of the magnitude referred to. The vortexia rising up out of the earth at night is negative, or less than the vortexia describing in daylight, and their conjunctive line is near the Earth's surface. Hence, 5 or 6 miles altitude is intense cold, while as 5 or 600 is so cold that mortals could not possibly measure it. In the early days of the Earth, when there was more heat emitted from the Earth than at present, it also rose to a greater altitude, but it was nevertheless thrown back to a great extent every day, even at the same manner it is today, by the Vortexian lens referred to. And as of the heat, so also of the light. In the sum of all the universe, there was and is now and ever shall be the same limited amount of heat and light. The vortex in formation driveth them to the center for a period of time. Nevertheless, a time cometh when the heat and the light escape outward, and through the vortexian lens recast them back in a measure, thus producing day and warmth on the face of the earth. Yet there is ever a trifling loss toward perpetual coldness and darkness. This great hemispherical lens, atmospheria, not only thus manufactureth light and heat, but also affordeth man the means of seeing the sun and moon and stars. It hath the power also to magnifying millions of comparatively dense Ethereal worlds, so that man can see through them. The student shall consider this from the standpoint of a magnifying lens in a microscope, which hath power to distend many things, so one can see through their fibers, which to the naked eye seem dense. For Etheria is not nearly so rarefied as mortals suppose. Without the Earth's atmospheric lens, man would not even see the moon, nor stars, and the sun itself would seem as pale red star. As the vortex of the Earth is thus a lens to the Earth, so is the moon vortex to the moon, and so also of the sun and other stars and planets, where light and heat are manifested. When the moon is half full, a dim outline of the shadow side of the moon is to be seen with the naked eye. This by the philosophers have been erroneously called the earth's shine, for they ignorantly believed the light of the earth was reflected on the moon. The real cause of this sublight on the moon is in consequence of the action of sublenses on the moon facing the earth's vortex, which operateth after the same manner as the other. When the moon produceth a full eclipse of the sun, by which philosophers ignorantly believe the light and the heat of the sun were cut off from the earth, it causeth darkness on the earth by breaking the linear connection betwixt the earth's vortex and the sun's center, so that the positive current in the earth's vortex is cut off, and that part that would otherwise be a lens becometh negative in its action in the linear space. But when the eclipse falleth far in the north or south part of the earth, only then the action of the moon's shadow will fall in the direction of the earth's lenses, so that a sublens is impossible. Whereas where there's such a thing as earth's shine, in time of total eclipse of the sun, the equatorial light would make the moon shine at that time also. As light and heat and magnetism and electricity are all one and the same thing, which are the manifestation of vortexian currents under different conditions, the student must not lose sight of the fact that none of these so-called things are things in fact. That is, entities of themselves separately or combined. Vortexia can be charged, as before mentioned, into iron and other substances. When it is charged in iron, it is called magnesium. When charged in phosphorus, it is called light, inactive. When charged in nitrate of silver, it is called darkness. If its application be continued on phosphorus, the latter will combine with common air and ignite. With phosphorus and without it, it will, as before stated, combine oxygen and hydrogen, and it will be also separate them. And yet vortexia, in fact, is no substance or thing as such, but is the vortex in axial, in orbic motion, or in other words, corporeal in an etheric solution. As previously stated, eth holdeth corpore in solution, which is the condition of atmospheria and of the Etherian regions beyond. When a portion of this solution is given a rotary motion, it is called a vortex. Nor is a vortex substance or thing of itself more than is a whirlwind or as a whirlpool in the water. As a whirlpool cannot exist without water, or a whirlwind exists without air. So without a vortex exists without the etheric solution. As previously stated, in the beginning of a vortex, it is long, but in the course of time, it hath a tendency to become round like a globe, but flattened a little at the poles. This also happeneth to every vortex that carrieth a satellite, that the periphery of the vortex is undulated, and the extent of its undulation can be determined by the minimum and maximum distance of the satellite from its planet. In consequence of this discrepancy, the lens power of the vortex of the Earth varies consistently, even daily, monthly, and yearly. Nevertheless, the sum of heat and cold and the sun of light and darkness are nearly the same one generation, 33 years, with one another. This was by ancient prophets called the first rule in prophecy. This was again subdivided by 3 into 11 years, whereof it was found that 11 years nearly corresponded with another 11 years. That was the second rule in prophecy. The third rule was 99 years, whereto was added 1 year. Sorry about this, little Missy over here. I tried to move her. She just wants to eat the stickies. In the case of the tides, a still further allowance of 6 years was found necessary to 200, but in the succeeding 400 years, a deduction was required of 5 years, whereupon the moon's time was 18 years. As the lens power loseth by flattening the vortex and increaseth by rounding the vortex, it will be observed that the position of the moon's vortex relatively to the Earth's is a fair conclusion as to the times of ebb and flood tide. In periods of 33 years, therefore, tables can be constructed expressing very nearly the variations of vortexia for every day in the year, and to prophesy correctly as to the winters and summers, so far as light and darkness and heat and cold are concerned. This flattening and rounding of the vortexian lenses of the Earth is one cause of the wonderful differences between the heat of one summer compared with another, and of the difference in the coldness of winters as compared with one another. Of these also tables can be made. Winter tables made by the ancients were based on periods of 666 years, and were called Satan's tables, or the times of the beast. Tables made on such a basis are superior to calculations made on the relative position of the moon. But where they have prophesied ebb and flood tide to be caused by certain positions of the moon, and they have erred in suffering themselves to ignorantly believe the cause lay with the moon. A man may prophesy by a traveling wagon what time it would reach town, but the correctness of his prophecy does not prove that the wagon pushed the horse to town. These revelations pertain more to the cause of things, that to giving new prophecies, what mortals cannot discover by corporal observation must come from an inspiration. By the year 4 BK, Leverrier of France, and I'm probably butchering his name or her name, sorry, prophesies the existence of Neptune by the calculation of planetary disturbances. Other discoveries have been made in the same way, whereupon they have believed that the said disturbances to be caused by one's planet power on another. Planetary disturbances are not caused by any power or effect of one planet or on another. The cause of the disturbances lieth in the vortices wherein they float. Mortals cannot see the vortices. Their only means of prophesying lieth in corpore. A man may prophesy of the moon by calculations of the disturbances of the tides, but to attribute to the tides the cause of the moon's position would be no more erroneous than to attribute the cause of tides to the moon. It is not the intention in these revelations to give new calculations in regards to occurrences on the planets. It is trifling difference whether a man prophesy by a vortex or by a planet, wherein he erreth in regard to judging the cause of things. He should be put out on the right road, wherein he hath had no knowledge of the forces and currents of the unseen worlds, and their dominion over the seen worlds. Revelation only can reach him. They have said there are 5 elements of Kapor, then again 60, 100, but in time they will say there are millions, and yet all of them are comprehended in the word Kapor. To resolve them, discover them, and classify them and their combinations is the work of man. Where there are aggregated together as the earth, the result is called a creation or a created world. When such a globe is dissolved in the eth and sublimated, it is said a world is destroyed or a star is destroyed. Nevertheless, in any of these operations, no one ingredient as such is annihilated. When in creation, more than to make a drop of rain, or the dissolution of a world, more than an evaporation of a drop of water. Pour a few drops of water on a table covered with dust, and each drop will become a globe. Look for them tomorrow, and they are gone, evaporated. The globe is annihilated, for it was not a thing in fact. But the water, which was the thing, is not annihilated, but evaporated. The term annihilation applieth to such as are not things in fact, but which are forms and figures. A ray of light, so called, can be annihilated, but that comprise it cannot be annihilated. Were the earth's vortex to break, the earth would be precipitated into dissolution under ordinary conditions. But were the earth's vortex to be swallowed in the vortex of another planet, then earth would be precipitated as a globe to such planet. Each is the case as regardeth double stars, in triplets and quadruplets, especially where they are in contact. The same principle holdeth in regard to the vortices of such nebulae and comets. One is frequently swallowed up within another. But in such a case, the corporeal comingeth In the case of double stars and triplets and so on, if conjoined, the center of gravitation, so-called, is not to each one, but to the intervening center between them. The polarity of such a group is as to the vortex. Think not, however, the double stars or triplets or quadruples are the limit of combinations in one vortex. There are clusters of planets, hundreds of them, thousands, and even millions, that sometimes occupy one vortex. As the globe can be annihilated, so can a vortex, and so can vortexia. For none of these are things of themselves, in fact, but combinations in some given place or condition. But the corpora of such expression of known forms and figures and motions cannot be annihilated. Though the general form of a vortex, as before stated, in its beginning is long, funneled shape, like a whirlwind. Its ultimate is toward a globular form. I said it. And through this current of a vortex is spiral. At first, its currents ultimate toward less spirality. If one could imagine a very long serpent in spiral form, constantly turning its head in one pole and its tail at the other, and forever crawling upon its own spirality, such a view would somewhat illustrate the currents of a vortex. The white lines indicate, they're referring to a diagram, but there's no way I can hold the book up and show it. I have to go find it. So I'll skip. Where the currents of the vortex to attain due east and west lines without polar outcropping, the winds would cease to blow on the face of the earth. The air and the earth would ultimate in equilibrium in axial revolution. Herein lieth the cause of the winds chiefly. Nevertheless, high mountain ranges of irregular forms and places on earth's surface add considerably to breaking and changing the currents that would otherwise result. The transcendent heat of the tropical atmosphere would seem to call for replacement from the north and south by cold currents of wind, but it must be remembered that only a few miles up from the earth, the temperature of the tropical air is as low as the polar air. Only so far as icebergs float toward the equator is there any very perceivable lowering of the temperature of the air and of wind currents toward the tropics. As previously stated in describing the positive current of vortexia being in the form of a right-angled triangle, the angle in the center of the earth and one leg toward the North Pole and one in the east at the equator, it will now be perceived that the greatest cold region of earth cannot be at either the equator or the poles, but must occupy places distant from the poles in the exact ratio of the difference in the power between the positive and negative currents of vortexia and vortexia, and corresponding to the atmospheric lenses of Earth. I call that the freaking ice wall. And I'm going to end it. I'll do one more. Almost there. Almost there. Getting juicy over here. We're getting juicy. Chapter 4. The currents of the vortex of the earth begin in constant change. The following results happen. In the regions where they overlap one another and break to a limited extent, producing discord in motion, certain eddies and whirlpools result, and the corporeal in solution is condensed. Like little planets or meteoric stones, varying in size from a pin's head to 10 or 20 miles in diameter. And the little broken currents in the vortex lose their prey and the meteoric stones or little planets are carried by the Vortexian current down to the Earth's surface. The belt in the atmosphere where these things happen is usually about 5 or 6 or 700 miles up from the Earth's surface, but the belt sometimes ascendeth 1,000 miles. But at other distances upward, other belts exist, and others still beyond, and so on. Another result that happened from this overlapping currents in the vortex is the production of rain and snow and hail. Certain parts of the earth are given to snow, certain parts to rain and hail, and other parts to drought. In drought regions, the Vortexian overlapping descended to the very earth, where they are called by various names such as cyclones, whirlwinds, and so on. But if they occur on the ocean, carrying either up or down a current of water, they are termed water spouts. In regions where there are rain, hail, and snowfalls, the Vortexian commotion taketh place from the half a mile to 3 miles above the earth's surface, where the discord resulteth in liberating the moisture, which was in transparent solution, and clouds result. But if the commotion continue, these are atomically still further liberated, and either rain or snow or hail resulteth, which is carried down to the earth. The places in the vortex of earth where these discords result are nearly uniform in their relative distance from earth, and in the times of their occurrence, having special reference to the prophetic periods previously given. And it refers to a plate where will be seen a variety of representations of the forms and figures of snowflakes. But these are not all. There are thousands and millions of them, differing so much from one another that description is not possible. A previously stated Kapoor, being in solution in eth, hath in the main the shape of a needle, but of such infinitesimal size that corporeal knowledge of them can only be at most subjective knowledge. But in the snowflake are both the casting and the mold of discordant Vortexian currents. But it must be borne in mind that where one snowflake is molded in one moment, another snowflake molded in the same place the next moment, and so on, would display no two snowflakes alike. 3 stages may be described in the discordant results. First, the cloud, second, the frozen cloud, which is snow, and third, the raindrop or hailstone. In meteoric regions, which are above such clouds, are produced rain. Kapoor also presenteth 3 stages of development, which are ash clouds, transparent or otherwise, and crystal needles and meteoric stones. The later only, as a general rule, are precipitated to the earth. But on certain occasions, both the other forms of Kapoor are also precipitated to earth. Allowing a certain size to rain clouds, which are near the earth, corporeal clouds high up in the vortex are proportionately larger according to the ratio of the difference between their globular circumference and that of the lower strata. So also are the discordant waves proportionally longer, wider, and deeper. It is an error to say that the atmosphere of the earth decreaseth gradually and continually in specific gravity according to the distance above the earth. It is an error to say there is any gravity in it, save only that in precipitative formations like rain, snow, hail, and meteoric stones. As before shown, these things have no gravity of their own to go in any direction, nor is there any attraction in the earth to pull them down. They are driven to the earth by the Vortexian current. By the point herein now considered is the commonly expressed knowledge of man that the atmosphere hath less density outward, away from the earth, in proportion to the distance from the Earth's surface. In one respect, this is an error. In another, a truth. As to density per se, there is no difference in the atmosphere on the face of the Earth compared to that of 1,000 miles high or 100,000 miles high. It is all in even balance as to pressure and density per se. But because the etheric solution of Kapoor is more sublimated by swifter axial motion in the higher regions, and because the lower regions contain less perfectly dissolved corpora, the difference hath been improperly described. Air is no heavier because of rain. The weight layeth in the rain only. Hence the gravity so called of the atmosphere hath reference only to imperfect solutions of Kapoor. And it is true that a subabundance of these imperfect solutions are near the Earth. At the sea level, a certain pressure seemeth to manifest, as in a barometer. On a high mountain, a less pressure seemeth to manifest. There is also a variation in the barometer according to certain conditions of the atmosphere. The difference is not that the pressure of the atmosphere is different. The pressure of the atmosphere per se is the same in all directions, high and low. The cause of the variation of the barometer is in reference to descension, sublimated solution of Kapoor, and hath no reference to pressure as such. This capacity to distension is not only external to the barometer, there's my crackly voice, barometer, but within it also, so that as a measure of atmospheric pressure per se, it is entirely worthless. The suction pump or inverted tube filled with water showeth the pressure of the atmosphere upward as well as downward, and showeth that the pressure is. Wherefrom it is shown there is no such thing as attraction of gravitation of the atmosphere toward the Earth more than any from it. Where the atmosphere is overcharged with an imperfect solution of Kapoor, or snow, or rain, that excess is that which bounceth toward the Earth. But this also only applieth in regions close to the Earth's surface. 50 or 100,000 miles up from the Earth, the axial velocity of the vortex is so great that rain or snow would be instantaneously dissolved, distended, and lost to sight. Consequently, the solutions in the higher atmosphere not only contain moisture, but they contain lead, iron, zinc, gold, platinum, clay, granite, diamonds, and all other things known to exist on Earth, and many others besides. In the early age of the vortex of the Earth, so swiftly flew the outer rim, the border eddies ensued, from which nebula congregated until the Earth had a nebulous belt around it. The belt in time loosening pace with the Earth's vortex, condensed and made the moon. But to return to the snowflake and to the needles of the Kapoor, whilst in the etheric solutions on a cloudy day, these solutions or needles, mist or dull atmosphere, are more or less transverse to the vortexian lines. In a clear day, the needles are linear to the Earth, and this is the reason it is a clear day. The latter direction of the needles may be called direct, and the former indirect. Wherein they are direct and they fall on the photoplate, the force of their blows is called the actinic force, and it is the same as where they fall on the wet linen in the beachman's field. In the actinic blow, a weak electric flame is produced by each needle, hence the bleaching power and also the power to blister and expose skin, which hath been kept for years in the dark negative. If a solution of iron transparent or a quinine or other recipient of negative electricity be sprinkled on the cloth, the actinic ray will not result in the electric spark, and no bleaching effect will be produced, and even sometimes, on the contrary, a black spot will result. Wherever the Vortexian current falleth, corpore is more or less damaged, or dissolved, or changed in combinations. On a piece of iron, fresh broken, it produced rust. Because the Vortexian solution contained oxygen, this effect hath been called oxidation. Nevertheless, in point of fact, oxygen of itself is inert. The break of its needles laboreth vortexia, which result in a minor representation of a discharge of an electric spark from the pole of battery. As previously stated, the Vortexian currents are to the earth in the daylight and from the earth in the night. Although their force is toward the center of the earth from east and toward the North Pole afterward, the following result happeneth. For example, a pool of water is charged during the day with the positive current. During the night, the negative current escapeth upward from the water. The decomposition resulting therefrom is called sea scum. A mucliangulous substance, I know I butchered that, which floateth on the surface of the water. In some days' time, this sea by motion from some external cause, assumeth defined shapes, crystalline, fibrous, and otherwise, after the manner of strange configurations of frost on the window pane. In some days after this, if the sea be examined with a lens, it would be discovered that here are miniature trees, even forests with vines and grasses. No seeds were there. This new property is called life, and because it existeth everywhere, it is called omnipresent. Man can account for the sea, for the positive and negative forces, for corpore and for eth, but life is unfathomable by man. The sea, green scum, floateth against the ground. Its infinitesimal trees and vines, grasses take root and grow, and live a season and die. Where from their roots and seeds a larger growth succeedeth. Thus becometh all world inhabited over the living creatures. Nevertheless, not one thing of all of them merge into another, but every one bringeth forth after its own kind. Man inquireth of the earth, the rocks, the air, and all of things. Who is this life? This omnipresent that quickened into life all the living. But none can answer him. Then man inquireth of life, who art thou, O life? And the answer cometh to the soul of man. I am life. I am the I am. I am the ever present. All thou seest in earth or heaven, and even the unseen worlds, also are my very person. I am the whole. And I'm going to leave it there. I will pick this up on chapter 5. I am that I am. The Monster Book of Oahspe. And the most complicated language to describe magnetism, poles, meteorological occurrences ever. Oh my goodness. That's a lot. That's a lot. And let me say, I didn't do terrible with pronouncing some of those words. it's how it's laid out, sentence structure wise. No bueno. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed that. It's a lot of language, but it's talking about Earth and what's going on inside of it and the planets, the densities, all of it. A lot of heavy science in that, but it's worth looking into because how the hell did Earth form? So it's another take, another perception. I hope you enjoyed. Sending love and light to everybody. All my information will be linked down below. If you got anything out of this, please give it a thumbs up. I know it was a lot. Please subscribe if you haven't done so already. And I'll see you on the next one. Bye.